Welcome to Conversations with Big Rich. This is an interview-style podcast. These interviewed are all involved in the off-road industry. Being involved, like all of my guests are, is a lifestyle, not just a job. I talk to past, present, and future legends, as well as business owners, employees, media, and land use warriors. Men and women who have found their way into this exciting and addictive lifestyle we call off-road. We discuss their personal history, struggles, successes, and reboots. We dive into what drives them to stay active in off-road. We all hope to shed some light on how to find a path into this world that we live and love and call off-road.
Whether you're crawling the Red Rocks of Moab or hauling your toys to the trail, Maxxis has the tires you can trust for performance and durability. 4 wheels or 2. Maxxis tires are the choice of champions because they know that whether for work or play, for fun or competition, Maxxis tires deliver. Choose Maxxis. Tread victoriously.
Have you seen 4Low magazine yet? 4Low magazine is a high-quality, well-written, four-wheel drive-focused magazine for the enthusiast market. If you still love the idea of a printed magazine, something to save and read at any time, 4Low is the magazine for you. 4Low cannot be found in stores, but you can have it delivered to your home or place of business. Visit 4lowmagazine.com to order your subscription today. On today's episode of Conversations with Big Rich, we have Quinn Pultz. He's the owner of 74 Weld Incorporated, which is a fab shop and manufacturer of precision components for automotive and off-road applications. That's according to his website. So we're going to find out more about Quinn and what he does and what he's done and where he's going from here. So Quinn, thank you so much for coming on board and spending the afternoon with me.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So let's start off with the question I ask everybody. And where were you born and raised?
Born and raised in a small town just north of San Diego called Cardiff by the Sea.
Oh, okay. I know Cardiff. What was it like? How long did you live there for?
I've my whole life, really.
Okay.
I now reside in Encinitas, which is one city over,
Right.
but still up in North County, still by the beach, and yeah, same area.
Excellent. So let's talk about growing up back then, 41 years ago when you were born and you grew up by the coast. I would imagine you probably surfed a little bit.
I did, still do. Yeah, I mean, I grew up surfing and skating. I did some team sports. I played golf in high school, surf team, and I dabbled in other stuff. I played ice hockey for years, kind of a random sport in San Diego, but it was one of the only sports. My parents wouldn't let my brother and I play football, and we both wanted to play a contact sport.
Because football's too dangerous.
Yeah, so ice hockey it was.
Yeah, there's a lot more ice hockey players without teeth or false teeth than there are football players.
Yeah.
And probably just as many concussions.
Probably. Yeah, luckily I avoided most of those, but did get hurt a couple times.
So what kind of student were you back then?
I was always a good student. So like my parents basically would leave my brother and I alone as long as we got A's and B's. And I didn't think that was that difficult to do. So, both of us got good grades and got to pretty much do what we wanted.
Very cool. And what kind of things did you guys do as, family activity wise?
So, my dad's an attorney, but he always jokes his mistress is golf. So, he put a golf club in my hands at an early age. And I've always kind of been into that. We did some camping, but not a ton. It was really, my brother and I got big into surfing and skating. And so they'd support us in that. We played travel soccer for a bit. And as well as, ice hockey was at the time, and it's still around. There's an ice rink in La Jolla at UTC. and we would get up at like 4:30 in the morning for hockey practices. And so, we did a lot of that stuff because the ice rink was used for like figure skating during the day, and ice hockey was super early in the morning. Um, so, looking back, like my parents really supported us in anything we wanted to do, down to getting up super early and taking us to the rinks.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And how did you decide on playing hockey, since there's not a lot of, I mean, you don't think of hockey in Southern California.
No, not at all. It was really, I guess, looking back on that, it was something my brother wanted to do, and I really kind of followed in his footsteps in everything he did, because we were close, and he's 3 years older than me, and he wanted to do it, so I naturally wanted to do it also. That's kind of how I got into most sports, with the exception of off-road.
And who was the better hockey player?
He was.
He was? Okay.
Yeah.
How about a surfing?
I don't know. I couldn't really tell you. I mean, surfing is something that like we both did a little bit competitively. I probably entered more competitions than him. Um, but surfing's kind of a sport that, the competitive aspect of it was never anything I enjoyed. I just liked, I grew up next to the water, and I've spent my whole life in the ocean, and it's just something I've always really enjoyed.
Right. So, question with the surfing, you always see it in the surf movies where the guys, somebody goes to the beach to go to surf a new spot for them, and they're totally looked as outsiders because, the people claim the beach for themselves or the break for themselves.
Yeah.
Was that something that you ran into, or did you see? I mean, I surfed a little bit in college, and I never saw that. Every place I went, nobody was that way, and that was back in that was late 70s, early 80s. But it was,
I see. So I think that is only very, like, seldom is that true. So there are places. One that comes to mind is Wind Sea in La Jolla is supposed to be very territorial, and like I've traveled. I spent a couple weeks in Bali. I've surfed in a bunch of the different Hawaiian islands. Hawaii is notorious for that reputation, but really, what it comes down to is there's a lot of etiquette in surfing, and if you don't follow that etiquette, it doesn't matter where you go, the locals will chase you out. But I'll tell you, like, I've probably surfed 20 different breaks in Hawaii. I've never once been hassled by the locals, because it really comes down to, like, when you paddle out at a break that everybody knows you're not a local, you're there as either a tourist or you're not recognized. Like, there's etiquette involved in that. And yeah, I'm sure if you don't follow that, they'll tell you to get out of there. But I think that's more of a construct of
the
movies than anything else. Yeah.
Yeah. Point Break comes to mind with that, especially.
Yeah. That's an interesting one. Yeah. I haven't had those problems.
So did you ever see the movie Surfer Dude with McConaughey?
I have not.
Oh my God, that's something you got to watch then. Oh yeah. It's pretty funny. That is Surfer Dude. You got to watch that with Matthew McConaughey.
Well, it's kind of like if you're a jackass in anything, especially like in an individual sport, if you act like you own the place or show up and don't pay any respect. And when I say that, like, what I mean is you don't paddle out into a lineup and go after the very first wave and like chase people off. Like, you have to be, especially if you're not familiar with the area, like, you sit, you let the guy give up a couple waves, wait your turn. There is a pecking order and there is a lineup in any surf break. And I don't care if you're pro or not. Like if you go into a spot, paddle straight out, back paddle somebody and try and catch up, catch the first wave that comes, nobody's going to take a liking to that.
Right.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So then, what about the hockey? How many years did you play hockey?
Ooh, I think it was 6 or 7 years.
Wow.
I played all the way through Bantam Midget. I was always a tiny guy. I'm 5'9", 150 as a grown adult. When I was playing, I was probably, I don't know, 100 pounds plus when I was soaking wet. And I'd play defense, which actually worked out because when we got up into the full contact stuff, I'd be taking guys out at the knees. So hip checks and that kind of stuff actually worked on defense because I could take guys' legs out and the refs would never call anything because, I was just a different size. I always played up.
That's good. So in school, was there any subjects that you excelled in or that you really liked as opposed to ones you didn't?
I did well in most stuff. I took a bunch of AP classes through high school so I could kind of start college with some credits. I guess I really liked the social sciences. I did well in all of those. I would get through math. I was never great at it. But so I took AP calculus and it was first period. And so it was hard for me. At the time I was not an early riser. And
even though you were getting up at 4:30 in the morning before that to go play hockey.
Well, but that's different. That was because I wanted to do it.
Okay.
So with math, I was always showing up either late or falling asleep in class. And I made a deal with my AP calculus teacher that if I got a 4 or better on the exam, 3 is passing, 4 is good, 5 is top level. If I got a 4 or better, she would go ahead and change my grade to an A. And she agreed to that. So I just kind of coasted and spent my time cramming for the exam and, got a 4 on that. So she went back, changed my grade. So, I always did.
Now, how did you con a teacher into doing that?
Well, it wasn't a con. It was, she thought I wasn't performing. And I said, look, it's just too early in the morning for me. And it was just a back and forth negotiation.
Okay.
But life is a negotiation, right?
True.
So yeah, that one kind of worked out in my favor.
I had a class, a German class, where the instructor had assigned contracts to do work, a certain amount of work to get a certain grade. And
that's fair.
And it was you could say, okay, I just want to be a C student, and he'd set up the contract so that you only had so much work to do. And of course
I like that.
Yeah, and I looked at it and thought, well, of course I want an A. And
right.
I did everything that I was supposed to do for the A, but I messed around in class. I was kind of a goofball. And I remember when the grades came out, and I'd contracted for an A. I did all the work because I had tested out with the teacher's aide or assistant teacher, whatever you want to call her. But she was a grown-up. She had, her teaching credentials and stuff, but she was, I don't know if she was new to it or whatever. But when the instructor posted the grades, he posted me with an F. And I'm like, what is this? And he explained that the contract said I was supposed to test with him. And I said, show me the contract. That wasn't in the contract. We looked at the contract, and he had written it in because it was like two copies. So,
mm-hmm.
he had the original, and then I had the mimeograph copy or whatever you want to call it underneath. When they put the pieces of ink paper in there between them or whatever.
Yep.
And so I I pulled mine out and said, "It's not on mine, it's on yours." And he goes, "Well, it doesn't matter. You needed to test out with me." Well, I got a
Yeah,
little
no, that,
upset, you might say, and kind of trashed the office on the way to, or his office and classroom on my way to see the principal.
how'd that work out?
The principal, I walked right in on the principal, in his office. I went right past the secretary, right, opened his door and sat down and just said, Shirts is going to be calling here in a minute, and it's probably not going to be good. And he goes, "Okay, what happened?" And he didn't answer the phone right away. And I explained it all to him. So then he called Shirts in, and Shirts started to explain to him what the deal was. And I said, "Ask him for his copy of the contract." So he showed him the copy of the contract. I said, "See mine? Mine doesn't say that on the same thing. So why did he change the grade afterwards?" I got my grade, but I didn't take German again after that.
Yeah, I mean, well, any contract, like you don't get to amend it without both parties agreeing to that. So I would
Correct.
hope that you would win that.
Yeah.
I would absolutely hope that.
I did get detention for a while for trashing overturning a couple of tables, and some of the
Yeah.
girls in the room were screaming, and some of the guys were laughing like, "What is going on?" as I cleared bookshelves and stuff like that, because I was pretty upset. But anyway, so this is about you anyhow. So, no contract signed in it. You just agreed to it, huh?
Yep.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I mean, I held up my end of the bargain. She held up hers.
Excellent. So then, any other classes that besides the social and math, was there
Um,
anything? Did you do shop
yeah,
classes?
so dude, I never did shop classes, and we had a shop class, but I just like we had welding on site, and I never did that. And we had an auto class, and it just wasn't at the time. It just wasn't an interest to me. I took a bunch of Spanish, and then I had a really really cool art teacher who left a really lasting impression on me. And so I was into I was big into ceramics at the time. And then after, I think it was right after high school, I got into glass and did glass blowing. And so I've always been like, I guess you could say, an artistic person if I find an outlet that really interests me. Um, but I had opportunities looking back on it, like, man, I should have taken, shop class. I never did. I took a woodworking class, and that was not for me. Um, but yeah, I didn't really get into metalwork or any of that till a little bit later, till after high school.
Okay. And high school, were you? Did you get involved with like high school politics or any clubs or anything
No,
like that?
nah, nothing like that. I mean, I surfed and skated and was somewhat of a delinquent, but again, like I figured, and rightfully so, like, hey, if I do all my work and I get good grades, people will, for the most part, leave me alone. And so that's what I did. I mean, I look at high school as, to this day, as like a perfect example of social conditioning to me. Like I had so many teachers who, tell me that they're preparing you for college, and I still kind of roll my eyes at that statement. Like, if you really want to prepare somebody for college, hand them a packet of information and say, we're going to test you on this, and you got to study yourself. Like, I never got homework in college. It was, if you want a good grade, you have to put in the time, right?
Correct.
Um, so yeah, I don't want to say I skated through high school. It just was not very difficult. So I put in the minimum amount of work needed to get A's and B's.
Right. And I think that it's interesting that you had the shop classes and the welding and woodwork and everything, because I grew up in an age, I'm quite a bit older than you are. Um, I'm 65 now, and I grew up in an age where, home ec shop, and I mean all types of shops, metal shop, I mean everything was available, and it was more of a, and art classes and music, and everything was you were given a wide variety of things, starting from like sixth grade
Hmm.
to high school, to the end of high school. You were shown so many different things, and I think that it was they were preparing us for life and giving us all an idea of what was out there.
Yeah, and I
And I
feel that a
don't
lot
think
of that
that's I
is
don't think
lost on this new generation.
yeah, I think that's all lost. Now it's just
Well,
when you talk about social conditioning.
nowadays, um, I feel everybody's pushed towards, well, you need to be an engineer or you need to be this or that. And they don't, I think that a lot of those classes, they've said, well, budget cuts. And that's a whole different topic of conversation because, like, the neighborhoods I live up that I still live in, like, I mean, if schools get their funding from property taxes, which is what we're told, why are these schools not flush with money? And I get that sometimes that it goes into a general fund and then dispersed out equally, and I'm good with that. But like, you're not going to convince me that they can't have these classes. I feel that a lot of that stuff is just because budgets are mismanaged. But I think it is kind of a shame that a lot of that stuff is dried up now.
Yeah.
And you know, I think that there's something to be said. I have friends that are plumbers and glass guys, and they can make a really good living. And there's nothing wrong with that. And we're going to come up, I would say, in the next 20, 30 years where there's just going to be a massive shortage of people that know how to work with their hands and actually create things, as opposed to somebody that just sits at a desk and they punch numbers. We're going to have a big void in the society, which I think is going to be a big problem.
Do you follow Mike Rowe at all?
I do. Absolutely. Yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah, he is. And I think that more people need to do that because I don't remember ever being pushed into anything by my parents. If I started something, they wanted me to complete it, whether it was scouts or sports or just anything.
But those are good lessons for life,
Right.
Yeah, I think that that's a big issue in our society. And you look at where we're heading, and we outsource everything. I mean, we just assume that Mexico and China and other places are going to do all of our manufacturing for us. And yeah, there's a shortage of people that actually make physical things on a daily basis.
And I think a lot of people that run businesses like yourself probably, well, I know guys that are at least in fab shops where they're working, say like Brannick Motorsports or Jesse Haynes Fab or 100 others that are always looking for somebody that can do something besides just sweep a floor. I mean, they got to be able
Oh,
to sweep
yeah.
the floor. That's the
Well,
first test. Can you sweep?
well, I have an interesting story about that. So, a kid that works for me who is now one of my engineers, he started out sweeping the floor. I hired him literally to be a shop kid. And fast forward 6 or 7 years, um, he had work ethic. So he would, whatever task you gave him, he would do a solid job on it. He'd put his head down, he'd complete that task, and then he would go, what else can I do? And he had that mentality of, what else can I do? Like, I'm here to learn, but I'm also here to work. And I just kept giving him harder things, and he kept excelling. And he went from sweeping the floors to running CNC machines to programming them to programming 5-axis stuff. And he'll finish up his engineering degree here next year.
Nice.
But I'll tell you right now that he will run circles around any college educated engineer. And he would have done that 3 years ago as like a freshman in college where he wasn't even into engineering classes yet, because he learned practical engineering through working in a machine shop. And I joke about this, but the engineers that come out of college, and this is a general statement, and I'm always cautious making general statements, but the engineers that we're training nowadays, they can draw a doorknob. They have no idea how it works or how it's made.
So true. And many don't care. I mean, look at traffic engineers. Look at, when they're designing highways or on-ramps or those stupid circles, traffic circles. They just need to get into a semi once and then try to go around a traffic circle with multiple lanes. Yeah.
Right.
That's
well, and you can apply that same concept to anything. I mean, I do a lot of, we do aerospace work. We do military stuff. We do a lot of, port security. I do a lot of government work. And so much of the time we get drawings from customers where we look at it and it's like, you can immediately tell that it's a new engineer or it's an inexperienced person who's never made parts, because they'll over tolerance and overcomplicate things. And in some circumstances, like, I know exactly what they're trying to do. And I look at this and I go, it's not their fault. It's that they've never actually made anything before. Like, they'll put square pockets down into a part. And it's like, well, how do you expect us to machine that? And then you come back with a really high quote and they're shocked. And it's like, well, it's because, do you really need this? Well, we don't need those things. Well, then you designed it to where it's a part that either can't be made or is super expensive to be made.
Right. My dad was a tool and die maker, machinist. His last grade, he was called a model maker, but all the stuff that he did, Bridgeport and all that, was it was all manual. Nothing was computerized. And I always asked him when I was growing up, when when all the computerization started, and why don't you leave the federal government as a civil servant and go into private trade? And it was just because I've got so many years here. I get to retire with 38 years at 55.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, why should I leave? And
there's
now
something to be said for that.
Yeah. I mean, well, now he's 80, 86, 88 years old, 88. Yeah. 88 years old. And, he's been retired for 33 years.
Yeah.
Almost as long as he worked. So,
That's
good
cool.
on him.
Yep.
But, the federal government didn't pay as well. So I was always looking at, and he goes, hey, there's more to a job in life than how much money you make.
Absolutely. I mean, there's more to life than money in general. It's, I look at money as a tool. Money allows you freedom. That's it. And I've always said that the only thing I care about is that I can make enough money that I don't have to care about money. And so, if you adjust your lifestyle accordingly, you can live really comfortably. It all really comes down to what's your goal in life, right?
Right. Keeping up with the Joneses is super important to you, then you better become a doctor or a lawyer, and a good one at that, huh?
Yeah. Well, and I try to hammer to my kids, like, don't ever compare yourself to others. Compare yourself to how you were yesterday and try and be better. There will always be somebody that has more than you, and you will always have more than somebody. Just be happy.
That's parenting done right.
Yeah.
So, college, what was your, I'm assuming that you went to college.
I did.
Okay. And where did you go?
UCSD.
Okay. And what was your when you started, what was your major?
So I started in math and physics.
Even though you didn't like math.
Right. Well, again, like, I was my own doing. I was heavily influenced by my brother.
Okay.
And always looked up to him, and he did math and physics and he loved it. And I guess the irony of this is neither one of us even remotely work in the field that we studied. So I started math and physics and didn't really care for it that much. And ended up swapping and doing totally different. I did I did a double major in history of war and revolution with a focus on the Middle East, and uh, and and a second degree in international relations with a focus on China. And so I thought at that point that I was going to go and do international law.
Okay.
So I finished UCSD, and while I was in college, I ended up buying a 1991 Jeep Wrangler and tinkering on that, and just fell in love.
And that was your first
And
four-wheel drive?
that was my first four-wheel drive. So my brother, while I was in high school, had a Ford Ranger that was a extra cab 4x4. And my first kind of getting into off-roading was I borrowed my brother's truck and took it off-roading and kind of messed it up a bit.
Where did you take it?
So there were like open fields in Fairbanks Ranch area, and I started working at, like, I don't know, age 14. I started caddying at all these country clubs, and I would make, like, for a 14-year-old dude, I was crushing it. I'd make like $100 to $200 a weekend, and I had no expenses. I had no overhead or anything, and so I'd caddy 1 or 2 days. Well, I'd caddy both days every weekend, and sometimes I'd do 18 holes. Sometimes, if I was lucky, I could do 36. And it was one day after caddying, I saw like this kind of dirt road and started exploring, and hammered the Ranger, popped a tire, broke some stuff on the front end, came back, and my brother was all pissed. But that was really my first kind of off-roading experience, I guess.
Okay.
So I got into, I got a Jeep, and really immediately took it off-road. And I broke, of all things, the rear track bar mount on a leaf spring Jeep. Why Jeep would put a track bar on a leaf sprung rear suspension, I don't know. But I didn't know at the time, like, just take that thing off and throw it away. And I took it to Off-Road Warehouse, and it was $500 to fix it. So I paid them to fix it and took it out the next weekend and broke the same thing again. And at that point, it was, I can't afford to do this. To fix it again would be $500. To buy a welder was going to be $600. And I just I've always had that attitude of, well, if other people can do this, then it can't be rocket science. How hard can it be? And at the time, I was on a forum called Jeepaholics Anonymous.
Okay.
It was kind of big in the early 2000s for the Jeep crowd. I was also on Pirate at the time, but
Everybody was.
Pirate was huge back in the day.
Sure was.
And one of the guys on the forums was like, "Hey, I'll teach you how to weld. Come on up." And he lived in Temecula. And the first project I really did was a spring over swap, where I put a 44 front and a 60 rear and did a spring over conversion on my YJ. And that's how I learned how to weld.
Did you get rid of the track bar?
I did. Yeah. Yep.
So how long did you have that 91 Wrangler?
Ooh. I had it for probably 5 or 6 years. I wheeled it. It basically turned into, that was how I learned how to build stuff. Is I did a spring over, and then I left the spring over front and went spring under rear because of axle wrap issues, and ended up cut the tub a bunch. And at a certain point, I ended up cutting the frame right behind the seats, linked the rear, went coilovers, did basically everything I could in that, and then decided it's time to build a buggy. And, I built all of that with a chop saw, a grinder, and a tube bender. And my little, I had a Miller 135, 110 volt welder.
And
I
this was
built
all
all
while
that
you
on
were in
the
college?
side. Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. I built it on the side of my parents' house in the dirt.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And you did you graduate when you graduated? Did you graduate with the degree in foreign affairs?
Yep. I did. I ended up with 2 degrees, neither of them, which I use. I know I've got them somewhere. Um, but yeah, I mean, to me, college is one of those things. So, and the only reason I picked up the second degree is after 4 years at UCSD, I really wasn't ready to leave and I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I stuck around and was like, well, I'll pick up. At one point, I met with a counselor and they're like, you could just take 2 extra classes and get a second major, you get a second degree. And I said, okay. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I stayed in school. And until they basically kicked me out and said, look, you've got 2 degrees, you need to leave and do something else. um, so, so, I didn't really have a direction, and my father's an attorney, and I said, well, I'm set up perfect. And people told me, well, you should do international law. So I was like, okay, yeah, I'll do that. So I was studying for law school and just found myself spending all my time. I rented a corner of a 1,200 square foot shop that a friend of mine owned, and he was racing 16 car for his son, or he bought a 16 car for his son to race. And so I started building a buggy there, and then ended up racing the 16 car a bit with his son, just because I was so into off-road. And, any opportunity I got, I jumped on.
Nice. And what association did you guys race in?
Ooh, mostly here in the States. We never raced that in Mexico. So it was like MDR,
Okay.
And Best in the Desert a little bit.
Okay. And how did you end up going to law school?
No, So I was studying for LSATs and like missing exams because I was working on my Jeep all the time or building the buggy at that point. And, my dad sat me down at one point and said, look, man, don't do this because I'm doing it. Only do what your heart's into. And, part of me wishes that my parents would have, I guess, pushed me and given me a little more structure on certain things. But, if they did, I don't know that I'd be in the career that I'm in. I might have gone a different road, but, my dad was never, well, I'm a lawyer, so you should be a lawyer. He was into golf and would take us to play ice hockey or to drop us off to go surfing. Like, he really wanted us to explore and be our own people. And I got a ton of respect for him for that, because I feel it's so easy for parents to push their kids down the road that they went or try to live vicariously through their children.
Right.
That was something they never did to me. And because of that, I just took a different path.
And that path ended up with 74 Weld, but how did that come about from working on your 91 Wrangler and doing some 1600 racing?
Well, so then the guy that had the 1600 car let me work on that, and it just kind of developed as, well, I can make a few bucks doing this. So then I built Jeeps for other people. I built different buggies. As that kind of progressed, I became friends with some guys in the off-road industry. And I just started fabbing for other people. I think that's how a lot of fab shops develop, is they do it for themselves, and then other people look and go, hey, you weld and you build stuff for Jeeps or race cars or whatever. Do you want to do something for me? And at that point, it was, yeah, sure, I'll build that. Here's my hourly rate. And I just kind of started small and just kind of got into it that way.
Was it always called, or when did the name 74 Weld come about? And what is it about that name?
So I was trying to figure out, I was starting to try to move to like more industrial stuff, because, man, being a one-man shop and building, I've always said that making your living off somebody's hobby is a difficult thing to do. And there's some people that are extremely successful at it. But, I don't remember what my first job was, but I got a taste of like industrial work, and holy cow, it paid a lot better. And so I started to get into, I guess, what you'd call precision welding. A friend of mine had a machine shop, and he would outsource me. I got into TIG welding, and he would outsource me these underwater stainless housings to weld, and a bunch of other, I guess, aerospace and defense components. And I'm trying to figure out, he's like, look, man, you should start a business and actually come up with a name. And I was talking to my brother about it, and he was staring at a periodic table of elements, and the 74th element on the periodic table is wolfram. It's a big W, which is tungsten. Okay. So I was, he goes, what about this? And he goes, okay, I guess I'll call it 74 Weld. And literally that was like a 5-minute conversation, and that's how the name came about. And like anything, I feel typically I have a 10-year attention span. And I was 7 or 8 years in when I came up with that name. And, a couple of years later, the same friend that was sending me the welding work said, hey, I've got an old CNC. I had a mill and a lathe that I used. And he basically said, hey, I've got this old CNC machine. I'm going to sell it. Do you want it? 10 grand. And that's kind of how I got my foray into machining. I bought it, said, all right, I'm going to learn how to do this next. And so it just kind of transitioned from fab to machining, which I still do a ton of fab work. I just, all the fab work I do is either military or defense or, I guess, ports. I do a lot of port security work. It's all government stuff, and then some industrial. So I still did welding, but then I kind of transitioned into machining at that point. And I've always had that mentality that, like, well, how hard can it be? I should be able to learn this. And I think that kind of came down to, that's one of the things I feel that college taught me, is that, like, nobody's there to hold your hand. If you want to do something, do it, learn it. And the resources are out there. And, at the time, I mean, there wasn't the crazy abundance of information that we have now with, like, there's anything you could ever want to learn, just go on YouTube and watch videos. Like, you want to learn how to do 3D CAD modeling, go on YouTube. Everything's there at your fingertips. And it was kind of there at the time, but it just comes down to having that attitude of, I can figure this out. And so that kind of transitioned me into machining, and I picked that up.
So you became a job shop.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, which is difficult. I still do a lot of job shop work to this day. one of the programs that we're on, which I think is pretty cool, is we're one of, I think there's maybe 4 approved suppliers on this, but we're part of the Navy's submarine rescue program. So we make critical components for submarine rescue missions. And, we do aerospace work. I do kind of a little of everything. So when people look at us, they, I think they might think, for the off-road industry, we're known for, our portals and other stuff that we do. But the reality is that's a product that I hope will take over the majority of my business. But if all I did was make portals, I would have been out of business a long time ago.
Right.
We still do job shop stuff, and there's still good money in that. So, off-road, we're known for portal stuff, but that's really not, that's still not the bulk of our revenue.
So you didn't make anything for Titan, right?
No, which is funny because I had a conversation with some of the guys on that program. And when I heard about that, I called them and was like, "Hey, are you guys going to go get that thing?" And they kind of chuckled and they were like, "Hell no, we don't go that deep." No, no, we had no part of that at all.
Good to hear.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your off-road parts. Your portals are the thing that I know you for.
Yep.
What else have you guys? What else do you produce?
Well, so I dabbled in a lot of things, and I've made parts for people in the off-road industry for a long time, since I got into machining. I started, one of the first projects I did was a sway bar arm for myself because I wanted a stronger, wider sway bar arm, and nobody really made it back in, I think this was 2010, 2011. And so, I would make little things, but people don't understand how unbelievably difficult it is to bring a product to market. And I didn't realize it either. So I would kind of make things that I wanted, but then I never really took the time to establish a brand or market or do anything of that sort. I just built things that I wanted to build. Or friends of mine would come to me and be like, "Hey, I want a set of A-arms for my Toyota Tacoma." Okay, so we designed and made A-arms. But once the product was built and done, I just had no interest in pursuing that much further. So I never really marketed ourselves. And I guess I'll be honest, like, I don't really have any desire to make parts that other people make, unless I think I can drastically improve on them. So, like, I never got into, I guess, the typical suspension parts, or, rock sliders, bumpers, all of that stuff, that a lot of, fab guys or machine shops that want to get into off-road, they build the same parts that everybody else builds and put a slightly different twist on them, whether that's from a design standpoint or a functionality standpoint. That stuff just didn't really interest me. And like, I'm the type of person that if I'm not interested in something, I give it next to zero effort. But if I am interested in it, I remember a time when, I literally couldn't even make it out of my shop. I peed in the corner of my shop because I was so dead set on fitting these last tubes on a buggy I was building that I didn't want to stop to go to the bathroom. And literally I peed in a bucket in the corner of my shop because I was so fixated on, if I'm into something, I'm 1,000% in. And if I'm not into it, I'm 0, and I just walk away from it. I think that's probably one of the reasons that I work for myself is I'm really, and I've worked on this over the years, I'm no good at doing things if my heart's not in it.
Okay. So let's talk about about your portals. The portal that I'm most familiar with is the Hummer portal, which is
Yep.
what the guys are using on the rock crawling competition side.
Yeah. Yep.
Because Jesse ran. I mean, basically Jesse just ended up eliminating all of the supply of used Hummer portals out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he ended up
And
going through a long process to develop his.
yep.
You're doing a Unimog axle, correct? Portal.
Yeah. So I started, a friend of mine, Mark Underwood.
Okay.
I want to say this is 2010. I was going to Johnson Valley, wheeling with him and a couple other guys. And I had a solid axle buggy on Spider Trax knuckles with CTM, the 1550 shavs from Jack Graff.
Right.
Jack's been a buddy of mine for a really long time. And Mark had an old set of MSI portal boxes. They were replacement boxes made out of steel for the Unimog 404. Super cool part. And I don't know whatever happened to them, but essentially Mark needed two more and knew that I was getting into machining, and I thought it was super cool. And I basically tooled up and made some replacement boxes out of aluminum for him. And that was kind of how I got into the whole portal thing. Was literally a friend of mine says, "Hey, can you make these?" And, probably a good thing that I was so green that I didn't know what all went into designing and developing something like that. And at the time too, I mean, I remember the first time I bought tooling to do it. I spent like $2,500 just on tools just to be able to make that portal box. And I got a lot of kind of guidance and assistance from a friend who had a big machine shop. And he kind of, I guess, looking back on it, he never tried to squash. Like if somebody came to me with that, I would have told him, don't do it, because it's super costly. But he was like, oh yeah, I can point you in the right direction. So I made a set of 404 boxes, and then MSI, I think, either went out of business or just stopped making them. And so suddenly, I had two more guys go, "Hey, I heard you made those for Mark. Can you make me a set?" And yeah, sure. So we started getting into the Unimog 404 stuff, which is not nearly as prevalent because, how many Unimogs are in the States?
Right.
And so, while Jesse went and built everything around the Hummer was not a platform I looked at, just because I didn't have friends that ran them. And so I went the Unimog route and kind of got into that.
How long a process was it to basically reverse engineer steel boxes that
Yep.
that he had into that aluminum that you'd created?
It wasn't very hard because, again, like a friend of mine at the time had a CMM. It's a coordinate measuring machine. And basically, this is the way I reverse engineer everything. At the time, I didn't have one of these, and it's a $100,000 piece of equipment. But we put a factory box up on the CMM and measured everything. And then he had one of his guys in SolidWorks, I didn't know SolidWorks at the time, redraw the box, and then we machined it. And so, again, I think that life, it's super important what you know. It's even more important who you know. And all along the way, I've been lucky to make friends with people who have knowledge and are willing to share that with me. And that's really kind of how I got where I got, is asking questions to the right people and having people that are willing to teach me along the way. So he reverse engineered a 404 box. We put it into SolidWorks and made a CAD model, and I just started making them after that. And that's really all I made, was for a couple of years, was just replacement boxes, because we found that if you replace just the box, everything else on the 404 would live just fine. The only reason that you'd break 404 gears is, what would happen is the boxes were cast iron, and they couldn't handle shock load. So the box would break or crack, and then the gear set would be able to misalign and would eat itself. And once we replaced the boxes, like, people just stopped breaking them. And I mean, even to this day, Mark still runs, I think he's built 3 or 4 or 5 of these Portal cars since then. He still just runs an old Unimog box that I machine, and he still runs stock gears. And I mean, I'll tell you, he ran, he was one of the first guys I knew that put an LS3 stroker into a buggy, and he had a 600 horse junkyard motor that he built himself with Unimog axles and Toyota diffs, and never had a problem with them. Never broke stuff, because it just wasn't a big deal. Once you took care of the box side of things, parts just weren't failing. And it came to a point where Cody Wagner was building a new car with Armada Engineering, I want to say in 2015.
Right. And the 4-wheel independent.
Yep. And Cody and I were friends, and he was one of the guys that I wheeled with, and he looked at it and said, "Hey, can we do portals on this?" And that was kind of where we took it to the next step and started actually making the rest of the components. But during that process, we basically ended up reverse engineering, changing, and doing everything we could around a Unimog 404 gear set. But we were still stuck with that same gear set, because I never got into gear development at that time. So Cody's car came out, and we had basically built every component we could, the upright, the box, the hub, but still had a stock gear set. And the gears worked for the first, I want to say, 2 years, but he started driving the thing harder. The car was getting faster, and the gears just weren't lasting. And I didn't know anything about gear design at the time. So he went to Wiseman and had Wiseman build gears for those. And that's still what he runs today. I mean, that independent car is still based around a Unimog 404.
But with the Weissman gears.
Yep. So he had Wiseman build gears, and at that point I went, I need to learn about gears.
It's not rocket science. Figure out.
It can't be rocket science. And again, I don't even remember how I ended up hooking up with him, but I ended up linking up with Jason Miles from TubeWorks. And Jason was really the guy that taught me gears and how to design a gear. And he's a really good guy. Jason taught me all the basics that I would need to know to start going down that road of how do you develop a gear set, what makes gears strong, and why we do what we do. Super, super instrumental in getting me to where I am today. And again, life is about who you know. And Jason led me down the path that ultimately, I guess, allowed me to take the next step and start developing my own stuff.
And now your portals are your gears.
Yep.
They're your boxes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you're not doing the bearings yourself. You're sourcing those, right?
No, absolutely not. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, we run on all of our race stuff. We run SKF bearings. It's a German company. They're just a really high quality precision bearing. So no, I will never, should never say never, but there's absolutely, well, bearings are something that like you don't dabble in. You set up an entire manufacturing facility just to make a bearing.
Right.
And you know, you can buy a precision bearing for $100 or less. I have a full machine shop. I don't think I could ever make a bearing even with the equipment that I have. And I've got, I mean, I'm 15,000 square feet and we're loaded with machines. I probably got, I don't know, 17 CNCs.
Wow.
There's a couple components that I don't make. And even if I can make them, I still won't make them. Like I don't cut my own gears in house. I blank them, I design them. We rough machine a gear. We hand it off to a gear cutter. They cut the tooth profile in it. They come back to us. We deburr them. We take them through a tumble process. They go out to heat treat. They come back. We finish all the bearing surfaces in-house. But I don't really have any desire to cut gears because, I mean, it's not very expensive. And there's companies that all they do is cut gears.
Right.
So I outsource that.
Okay. And
yeah,
at what point did you say these things would be great if I could just make them for bolt-on for stock housings?
Well, so when I was developing the 4-gear race, which is what, you know, all the Ultra 4 guys are running now, I had one of those moments where, so there's so much that I learned through prepping Cody's stuff. Cody was running tapered rollers on the upper gear, and tapered rollers in a portal are just a nightmare to set up because essentially on a tapered roller bearing, you really want to have a little bit of preload on that. And determining how much preload you have when you can't actually feel the gear at all is super hard. And so I went through all this process of talking to bearing manufacturers, and we would measure preload based on rolling resistance. And I made a tool that would measure inch-pounds of rotational torque it took. And so we would sit there and shim each bearing to get to the point where it wasn't free spinning and it wasn't too much preload. And it was just like, sometimes it would take me an entire day to shim just the upper gear. And if you don't preload those bearings, like don't expect to get a long life out of them. And there was just no way to easily do it because of some of the design constraints that we had. It was just a pain in the butt. So, you know, I was doing all this, and I just remember one evening where I was struggling getting preload set and going like, it would just be so much easier if we could do it a different method. And because we were running a helical gear set at the time, a helical gear set, you cannot run the same bearing package that you would in a straight cut gear set. And Jason was like, look, just I guess this was right about the time that I started working with Jason. He goes, look, a straight cut gear set is totally strong. They're running every single race transmission that's out there. In any road race, or you look at any sequential transmission that handle huge horsepower, they're straight cut gears. And so the beauty of a straight cut is you can run a completely different style bearing that doesn't need to be preloaded. And I was sitting there going, man, like it would be so much nicer if this was easy to work on, like my solid axle car, which runs a Spider Trax unit bearing. And I went, oh, wait a second, like, why don't I try to develop a portal with a Spider Trax unit bearing? And Spider Trax at the time, I think, had just come out with their Pro Series, which is a massively strong F650, 750 hub unit. And I kind of looked at designing around that, and the package worked really well. And that's kind of, I started going down this road just in race, but then I quickly realized that, like, if you look at all the bolt-on applications, on a front wheel bearing, every automotive manufacturer in the world runs a unit bearing. And they do that because, you know, they come pre-packed, pre-greased, like they're super easy to work with. And so I designed a gear that would index into that unit bearing, and then the gear could become hollow, and you could shove a needle bearing inside of that and get a 3-bearing lower package. And I went, oh, this is going to be super strong. But in the back of my mind, I was always aiming for mass market, but I'm of the mindset that there is absolutely no better way to develop a product than to build it for a race car first. Because if it can live through racing, it'll live through anything. So that's kind of how our 4-gear race portal developed, was built around a Spider Trax unit bearing, and we still do the same thing to this day.
Nice. Very nice. And that's that same technology then and design that for the race portals is the same as the bolt-on JL or TJ that would bolt onto those.
Yeah. So I looked at, right when we started doing all the race stuff and we kind of worked out the bugs out of that, I started looking at bolt-on applications and said, man, I think I can scale this down. And about 2 years ago, I had kind of the right people in place at my business to go, hey, let's do a Jeep one. Because again, like, I was a Jeep guy at heart. So we built a unit, and I went away from the race design to try to make it more compact, which it ended up not being. But we did one where we did hollow idler gears, and I did all of our gear calculations based on a solid gear, and we made it hollow. And I kind of looked at the cross section of it and was a bit nervous, and I ran it by Jason at TubeWorks, and he goes, no, I think it'll be okay. And long story short, it was not okay. It was a kind of a catastrophic failure. I went out to Moab, I wheeled the thing, and broke everything inside, because the idler gears would essentially split in half. So we came back and did the math again, and the gear was fine, but the cross section was not thick enough. And so these idler gears would just split. So, you know, we had a bunch of time and money invested in the design. I knew that the unit bearing design was good. And at this time, I had already applied for patents around a lot of this. And we kind of took a step back and said, look, like, we know the race stuff works. Why don't we take the gear set out of race and scale it down as much as we need to make it fit around the Jeep package, which I knew that you got to run a 17-inch wheel. You've got to be able to have, you know, a wheel bearing that can take ABS, and you need to be able to keep the factory caliper. And it turned out that all we had to do was scale our race gear set down 10%, change the ratio, and it all packaged. And so that's kind of where we ended up. Now, I was a different diametrical pitch on our first iteration, which, without going too deep into diametrical pitch, it's basically, this dictates the height of the tooth. So it was a smaller tooth. Our race stuff is a bigger tooth. And as a general, as an oversimplified version, if you listen to like the Mason Motorsports portal, it makes a ton of noise. but they don't care. And a lot of the noise that you're hearing out of that is not really the portal, it's more the transmission. But they have a portal that it whines quite a bit. And I knew that I didn't want that for a road application. So I did a bunch of research as to what produces gear noise. And I thought I was going to be okay with we're a 6 diametrical pitch on our race stuff as well as our bolt-on Jeep stuff. And I thought it was going to be okay. And I talked to Jason about this, and Jason kind of educated me and sent me a bunch of kind of down a path where I could do my own homework, where we learned about what produces gear noise and why. And we just said, well, let's try it. So we ran the race stuff, same diametrical pitch, same tooth profile. And I guess at the time I thought, hey, we're lucky we get no gear noise. But now I look back and I go, well, I know exactly why we don't get gear noise. But that was a big concern when we were developing the Jeep stuff. And we just made it as close to our race stuff as we could, because look, again, like if it's good enough for race, I guarantee it'll work in a Jeep application. And fast forward 2 years, we've still, knock on wood, yet to have a single gear failure in any Jeep portal, or Tacoma or Bronco for that matter. But the Jeep stuff was what we released first. And I mean, we run V8s and 40s on that. But knowing what I know now, that gear set's probably overbuilt, but I'm okay with that. Because it's funny, you know, if you have a failure on, say, an axle shaft, it's perfectly fine because everybody breaks axle shafts. But if you have a failure on a gear, it's going to be junk and it's crap and portals don't work. And so, you know, it's just because it's a tech that people have either preconceived notions or misinformation on why something would or wouldn't work, right? And I think, yeah, I mean, it's just, it's an evolutionary process. And I am of the mindset that if you're going to fail quickly and then fix it and make sure you're not failing over and over again on the same things. And so, you know, our gear set that's in all of our bolt-on applications is the same gear set. And all we have to do when we do a new application is, does the ABS function? And that's fairly easy for us to work out because we use a unit bearing, and then accommodate for, you know, brakes and other things. So the Jeep took us a while to iron out, but, you know, we started beginning of this year having 0 for Bronco or Tacoma, and I've got both of them now within 6 months. So, and we'll continue to develop on platforms. But it's just a lot easier now that we have a proven gear set.
Right. So then it becomes just the mounting surface between axles to your portals.
And I mean, I make so many uprights. We've probably done 30 different iterations of uprights for people. So like whether that's a 2-wheel drive upright or for a portal or for whatever, that's something that as a shop we're really good at. So like we can design an upright and machine it in like a week. And so if your gear set's the same, your bearing package is the same, and your box is virtually the same, you've got a different wheel bearing and you've got a different upright. And that's it. So for us to take it to a new platform is pretty quick. I think it took us 4 weeks to go into production or to go into a prototype for the Tacoma stuff from start to finish. And so we're able to kick stuff out fairly quickly.
That's pretty good. I wouldn't have thought it was that fast.
Well, part of it is because when you do everything in house, you're not waiting on, a quote and then another machine shop to make your parts. Like when I get going on stuff, I like to be able to walk out and hand guys, a job and say, I need this built. Like, how quick can we get it done? And I think that's one of the big perks of having the right tools at your disposal. I think that's one of the things that kind of set us apart was, we were making aerospace stuff as it was. So I have all this super fancy equipment sitting here, where, I have a CMM, we can go reverse engineer things. I have 3 5-axis, real high dollar 5-axis machines, super precision stuff. And more importantly, like the guys that I have at my shop are just absolute rock stars. Like they're just really good machinists who, you can't really throw a project at them that they can't crush. They're phenomenally talented.
Sweet. That's awesome. So on the automotive side, what should we be looking for as the next applications? Because now you have the Jeep, the Bronco, and the Tacoma.
Yeah, so we've got Jeep, Bronco, Tacoma. I'm going to this year, so there's a good chance I'm going to do 2024 Tacoma here shortly. It kind of depends on if I'm going to get one from Toyota. I'm hoping to be able to try to build a portal for a 2024 Tacoma for SEMA. But that's kind of dependent on Toyota. But there's a couple other platforms I'm looking at, which is Chevy Colorado ZR2, and then Toyota Tundra, and that also crosses over to Land Cruiser 200 series. But right now we're trying to stay. So it's one thing to build a prototype. It's another thing to have all the documentation to be able to go into production on stuff. And so we're an AS9100 machine shop, which basically means that we have the ability to be a tier 1 supplier for aerospace. And the niche that we kind of fell into in aerospace is making parts that nobody else can really make or that other companies don't take. So like we do a lot of really funky hard materials like Rene 41, which is like a nickel alloy. We do a fair amount of nickel alloy stuff and then titanium, because my guys are really good. And if you find a niche that you're one of the only shops that goes after, you can make a little more money doing it. So, because of our aerospace background, we have a lot of stuff in place where we try and be extremely organized and documented. And so we're focusing on, a super tight bill of materials and organization and all the structure that allows us to kind of grow. And it's one thing to build 5 of something. It's a whole nother ball game to build 500. And the jump from 5 to 500, I think, is extremely painful for people if the infrastructure is not there. So, we've done our best to make sure that we have infrastructure to scale this stuff up. And so that's kind of my next big step is I want to continue to develop for other platforms, but I really want to scale this stuff up so that I don't want to produce 10 of these. I'd like to produce 1,000. So I'm going to push for that. The other thing that I'm doing, and I can talk about it because I filed for a bunch of patent stuff around this, is for the Chevy Colorado ZR2, I'm actually looking at a 1-to-1 portal.
Really?
And nobody's ever done that before, right? So every portal that's ever been made is always a gear reduction. And the problem is when you look at, there's a lot of applications like Raptor, Raptor Bronco, Chevy Colorado. It's really hard to run a front only portal and match a gear ratio in the rear. And the Colorado, I think, is a really good platform for a front only portal. And so we're looking at doing a 1-to-1 on that. And I started doing research on the 1-to-1, and nobody had ever made a 1-to-1. And so I wrote a specific patent around 1-to-1 where it's basically a 4-wheel drive spindle lift. And so I filed for a bunch of stuff around that. And the first 1-to-1 that we'll do will probably be a Colorado. But, you know, I don't want to get too far ahead. We've got Jeep, we've got Bronco, and we've got Tacoma, and they're all functioning, operational, and I'm starting to go into production on the Bronco and the Tacoma right now. And so before I get ahead of myself, I really want to focus on dialing those in. And I'll probably wait till end of year to really go into more platforms.
Cool. If you ever need a Gen 1 Raptor, let me know.
Yeah. One of my main machinists here has a Gen 1. And he's been saying the same thing. Most of the time when we develop for a platform, I'll just go buy the vehicle. Right. And I have found that there's a correlation. The more expensive the vehicle is, the more likely somebody is to put portals on it. So like on the Jeep stuff, my number one seller is a guy that buys a 392 and says, wait, you mean I can just bolt on a portal and run a 40? That's all I have to do? And I say, yep, that's it. And we've got a handful of guys now who have done one of your friends, Casey Shear, same thing.
Right. He
bought a 392, bolted on a portal, and goes and wheels the thing.
That's pretty damn awesome.
Yeah. So, you know, it's a long evolutionary process, but the more you do, the quicker it becomes and the better you get.
Very true. Very true. So let's last thing, let's talk about family.
Yeah.
You're married?
I am.
You have kids?
I do. I've got 2. I've got my daughter is 11 and my son is 8.
Nice.
Yeah.
And how did you meet your wife?
Good story. I missed my flight and she was early for hers, and we met at the Gordon Biersch at the San Jose airport. I lived in San Diego. She lived in Los Angeles, and we had maybe 40 minutes to kind of, I sat down, the bar was completely full, and I look over and I see this good looking lady at a table, and I kind of went over and, hey, is this seat taken? Nope. And so I sat down and just kind of casually shot the shit with her. And at the end of it, she was leaving, and I was like, hey, we should continue this conversation. So I got her phone number, and we dated long distance for a couple years. She was in LA, so I made a ton of trips up there. I was in Encinitas. She would come down, and yeah, it just kind of, it was a good fit. And fast forward, I mean, we've been married for 11 years, been together, no, 12. Shoot, I should know this. I'm going to get in trouble. I think we've been together for 16 years together, and I think 12 married.
Very good.
Yeah.
Excellent. And what do you see in the future? You're going to stay in Encinitas and run your business in California forever? I know Cody keeps saying that he's never going to leave California.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, like I just don't. California is about the most unfriendly state to the type of business that we are in. Um, but the reality is, like, my roots are just too deep here. I could see myself. I've been traveling lately to Montana and Wyoming, and I've been looking at stuff up there. But I don't see that as a viable option for me to move my business. Um, the talent pool is really good down here, and quite honestly, like, I can't I can't do what I do without the people that I have around me.
Right.
And so, no, I mean, California's, I can bitch about it all I want, that they don't like my business, they don't want me here, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just whining about it. I'm not going to move. There's not much I'm going to do. I'm here for at least for nothing's permanent in life, but I'm here for a while. Um, it just costs more money, and it is what it is.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
um, do you have anything out there that's well in Skunkworks? Is there
Um,
something we can look forward to that you just tell me yes or
yeah.
no?
So yes. So, I believe that if I'm going to develop a product, it's got to fall into one of three categories. And the first one is somebody makes it, but it's ridiculously expensive for no reason. And I think I can crush it and make it for a fraction of the price. And I do think it's a cool product. So that's one. And I try not to do too much stuff in that field. The second one is nobody makes it. And I think that it would be cool to make. I like those kind of products. Or three, somebody makes it and it's not a good design, and I think I can drastically improve on it. And the second one's kind of my favorite. I somehow inadvertently have found myself in the steering game. Um, I I got requests from guys about the Bronco steering rack, and I started looking at that. And anytime I'm going to look at improving on something, the first thing I do is take it apart. And I take the thing all apart and went, oh, I know why this is breaking. Um, all steering racks that I've put my hands on in an OE application have essentially the mesh between the rack and pinion is held in place by a spring. And as you shock load that steering rack, the spring can compress, and now your rack and pinion, which are a wedging gear set, can come out of mesh and either skip teeth or break. And so we saw this on the Bronco, and we quickly developed a Bronco steering rack, which is selling way better than I had ever anticipated. And as I was developing this, Tacoma guys, and I don't know the Tacoma market at all yet, but Tacoma guys were screaming at me saying, make a rack for us, make a rack for us. And that is in the horizon. Is as soon as we get through with ironing out the bill of materials on Bronco and Tacoma, we've done all the reverse engineering, and we started initial designs on a steering rack for the Tacoma stuff. So I somehow found myself in a market of, I'm going to make steering components. But it falls into one of those categories, which is nobody made a steering solution for the Bronco, and nobody makes anything for the Tacoma. So we're going to do steering racks for the Tacoma. And because Toyota is such a friendly platform to develop on, because like the steering rack that I'm going to do for a Tacoma is basically 2003 in a 4Runner and 2005 in a Tacoma to the current model.
Wow.
And if you do Tacoma, then Tundra and Land Cruiser is like just ever so slightly different. And I guess we're going to start making steering components. So I don't really have a business model where it's like I make bumpers and skid plates. Like a portal and a steering rack are totally different components. It's just, I like to make things that I like to solve the problem that nobody else is solving, as long as it's answering a question that people are actually asking, if that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense.
And then the biggest hurdle is, how do you bring the product to market, because nobody's ever seen it before? And, I got to give, on the portal side of things, I got to give a lot of credit to Jesse Haynes, because what he did in rock crawling was a huge service to us, in the sense that he basically developed a portal based around an existing application, but tailored it to rock crawling. And what that did for us, I feel, is that it brought awareness to what is a portal. Because for the longest time, I was making this stuff and I'm like trying to explain it to people, and nobody had any idea what it was. And Jesse deserves credit for like bringing the portal to rock crawling. That, I mean, I don't know how many of those he's sold, but he sold a ton. And I felt that about 2 years ago at Trail Hero, the conversation shifted from what is a portal to, oh, I've seen those. That's a portal. And I go, yeah, because getting through that hurdle when you're trying to develop a product that the market hasn't ever seen is really hard. Like, it's hard to sell a product to a customer who doesn't even know what the product is, right? Or isn't familiar with it.
Yeah, and they're not looking for that solution to something.
Yeah, and part of that was Jesse on the rock crawling side, and then some of that was Mason Motorsports on the trophy truck side. And then I kind of found a niche. While I make stuff and I have portals on trophy trucks, I found a niche in the Ultra 4 world, because like all the guys that are in Ultra 4, they're kind of buddies of mine from wheeling. Like I've known all those people in that industry. Like I've known Dave Cole since I think 2003. Dave was on that forum, Jeepaholics, as well as Pirate, and we would wheel Johnson Valley. Like, so that market was just an easy one for me to get into, because I already kind of knew these guys.
Right.
And it took Mason and Jesse and myself a long time, I think, to kind of develop a market that really wasn't there. You go to Europe and portals are fairly, I don't want to say they're fairly common, but they've been there for 70 years. Short of the Humvee, there was nothing here in the States. And unless you're in the military, you don't really know the Humvee, because they're not on the road, other than, Arnold Schwarzenegger had one, right?
Right.
So, that's, market awareness has been a challenge, but I think we're finally past that hurdle, which I think is huge. Customer education is a lot of work, and there's a lot of people, I guess, concurrently working on that, and they've helped us with that.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, Quinn, I want to say thank you so much for coming on board with conversations and sitting and talking about your life and the development of the portals and everything else that you're doing. I found it absolutely intriguing. I didn't do a lot of talking, especially in the last half, because I'm trying to absorb all of the information that you threw out there. Absolutely amazing.
Thanks. I warn everybody when I get on a podcast, and a lot of times I'll do it ahead of time, is just fair warning. Like, you get me talking on a topic that I'm passionate about, I could talk for it forever.
Right. I understand.
And because it's been a big portion of my business and my life for the last 5 years. So yeah, it's something I really enjoy doing. And, I guess final words on some of that is, if you find something that you love and you enjoy doing, like, it's a true statement. You'll never really work a day in your life.
Right. Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. I appreciate it. And I really hope that at some point we get to meet one-on-one, face-to-face type thing. And I'd
Well,
love to see your facility.
yeah. Hey, if you're ever down in San Diego, absolutely. I'm on the same street in El Cajon as like Tisco. I'm right around the corner from McMillan. I'm directly across the street from Jack Graff from CTM
Okay.
and Score, Accutune. There's a bunch of people on this same street. Doors always open. You're always welcome. And I will see you. I'll chase you down at Trail Hero this year.
I'm not necessarily going to be at Trail Hero,
Oh,
but I'm trying. I'm trying.
one of my favorite events. I've been to every single one.
Oh, very good. I was at the first 3, I guess, putting on the rock
Okay.
crawl during that for my son.
Yep.
But
Yep.
since then, we've been really tied up into the Rebel, and
Okay.
I've not been able to do the both of them because of the start dates and the end dates on
Yep.
one and the other. This year
Yeah.
they're separated by a few days, and so we may make it down there, but I got no guarantees. But if we're there, we'll definitely want to hook up.
Yeah, and I'll talk to. I'll definitely. I'm sure I'll see Rich out there. If I do,
Absolutely.
I'll ask about you.
All right.
Absolutely.
Sounds great, Quinn.
Cool,
Thank
man.
you so
I
much,
appreciate it.
and I'll let you know when this airs.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Okay, thank you.
Take
Talk
care.
to you later. Bye. Well, that's another episode of Conversations with Big Rich. I'd like to thank you all for listening. If you could do us a favor and leave us a review on any podcast service that you happen to be listening on, or send us an email or a text message or a Facebook message, and let me know any ideas that you have, or if there's anybody that you have that you think would be a great guest, please forward the contact information to me so that we can try to get them on. And always remember, live life to the fullest. Enjoying life is a must. Follow your dreams and live life with all the gusto you can. Thank you.